Hello everyone, welcome back. So today in this video we're going to see on how to handle exceptions in Python. So let's get started. So before that, I'm just going to create a new file called as hello.txt. Apparently we already have a file, but let me just create a new file over here. There we go. And I'm just echoing or entering hello user into that new file. So if I open that up, you can see the line hello user. Now, what I'm trying to do is I am trying to open up the file using this line f equals to open of hello.txt in read mode, and then I'm closing it, and then at the end I'm just printing out a line saying that I need to print this line. All right, but notice here I have intentionally misspelled the file name. It is hello.txt, but I'm intentionally giving the name as hello.txt. So this is most likely going to give me an error. So let's just see. There we go. So this statement is particularly throwing an error, and that error is file not found error, saying that no such file or directory hello.txt. And notice that since we got an error at this line which followed that error line did not get executed. So let's say you're writing a code, and some at some point of the code you got an exception, and because of that the rest of the code is not being executed. So you don't want that, right? So in some of the cases, even though the exceptions are there, you want the rest of the code to be executed. So for that, what you got to do is you need to implement exception handling into it, and we are going to implement that using try except blocks. So what I'm trying to do here is that I'm just putting the code of opening the file and closing the file inside the try block, and then I'm I'm writing a except block. So what happens here is that if the code in the try block throws any exception, any sort of exception, the except block is going to get executed. So let's say this line, the line number 2, f equals to open of hello.txt in read mode. This line throws an exception. So the execution of try block stops here, and then the control moves on to the except block, and this particular line gets executed, and the flow of execution continues. The code doesn't abruptly stop here, but the flow of execution continues, and the last line is also executed. So let's just see that in action. There we go. So we got an error over here, and it went on to except block and printed out there is no such file, as you can see here. And then at the end of the outside after the except block, we have this line. I need to print this line. So this line also got executed, unlike the previous example where the last line is not getting executed because of the exception. So that is how you implement try and except blocks. We are going to see a few more examples of that. Now let's just say I have corrected the file name. I have modified the file name into the right file name, and then I'm trying to do something here, right? I'm trying to create a new variable, and I'm assigning the value of badvar to it. So badvar is also another variable which is not yet created. Okay, so this variable, the badvar, is not created, but I'm trying to use that variable to assign it to a new variable. So obviously we're going to get an error saying that there is no such variable called as badvar, right? But if you notice here, when this try block throws an error and the control goes on to except block and this line gets printed, I have no idea that if the error has been raised from this line or this line or this line, right? So what you need to do is, so let's just first see this in action. So we got the same output, but I'm not sure that the error is in this line or this line or this line, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the except block specific to an exception. Okay, so I'm going to make the except block catch only file not found error. So you can mention the exception name or the error name after the except keyword to catch that specific exception only. All right. So if you see, I'm opening a file in read mode, and the file name is also correct. And now I'm writing the statement var equals to badvar, and this is obviously an exception because there is no such variable as badvar, and the except block is only going to catch file not found error, right? So it is not going to catch the var equals to badvar exception, which is name error. So now let's just see that. There you go. Now if you see, the except block did not catch this particular error. It was only supposed to catch a file not found error, and we didn't get any file not found error. Hence we got an exception, and the last line didn't get executed. We got a name error saying that name bad var is not defined. All right. What you can do is, if you want to write except blocks for specific exceptions and a generic except block for all the generic exception, all the other exceptions, you can write another except block followed by the previous one with a name exception. Okay, so this is going to do is, it is going to catch all the exceptions apart from the file not found error, and it is going to execute the except block, right? So when I run this, this is not, the try block is not going to give file not found error, but we are going to get a name error over here, which is in var equals to bad var, and this exception is going to be caught by the except block on line number 6, which is except exception. Oops, something went wrong. There we go. We got this particular line printed, this particular except block being executed, and at the end, I'm getting this line printed, this print statement executed. But let's say you want to know what kind of exception that we are catching here. We don't know what exception we are catching here. We're just catching any exception, any generic exception. So what you can do is, you can actually print the error message of the exception, and you can just print that out instead of a custom message. For that, what you need to do is, so this is exact same code, but what I have did is, I have modified the syntax a little bit. So here we had except file not found error and except exception. But here what we are doing is, we are writing a variable. Okay, so we are giving a name for that exception, a variable for that exception, where the exception error message is going to be saved. So I'm writing except file not found error as E, and I'm printing that E. So this will print out the error name or the error message that is going to be associated with that particular exception. Similarly, with the exception, we are going to give it a variable E, and we are going to print that out. And now let's just see. So this line number 3 is supposed to throw an error for us. So let's just see what error it throws. There we go. So we had an error at this line, and when I run this, this exception is caught by the second except block, and if I print out the error message, I get name bad var is not defined. So it is saying that this particular variable is not defined, and as usual, the last line is being printed, and the flow of execution has not stopped. So that's what we want. Now let's try it for the file not found error exception as well. So we tried for the generic exception. Now let's try for the file not found exception. So I have modified the file name again to some wrong file name, and that gave me no such file or directory hello.txt, right? So likewise, you can chain multiple except blocks one after another to catch multiple exceptions, or you can put a generic exception which is going to catch all the exceptions whichever you throw at it. All right. Now we're going to look at else blocks. So else blocks are similar to try except blocks, but so let's just go over the try and except blocks once again. So try block is going to look out for any errors that the code might throw, whereas except blocks is going to get executed if there is any error in the try block. And now except else block is quite opposite to the except block. So as except block executes if there is an error in try block, else block executes if there is no error in the try block, which means if we do not get into any except block, the else block is going to execute it. So if you see here in the try block, I have this line f equals to open of hello.txt in read mode, and there is no exception here because I have the file name correct, and this is going to run just fine. There are no errors or exceptions over here, and hence I'm not going to jump into any except blocks over here. So we are not going to execute any except blocks because we don't have any errors. Hence after the try block, the else block is going to execute. So as this says runs, the else block runs if no exception is thrown. All right, so I'm just printing out f.read, and then I'm closing the file. So this is very useful to close any files or databases that you might have opened in the try block. So let's just see. There we go. The try block got executed. Since there are no errors, it got into the else block, and I'm just printing out the file contents by using f.read, and I'm closing the file. and as usual we got the flow of execution going and the last line getting printed out at the end. All right, now that was else block. Now let's look at finally block. This is also very similar. I'm just going through this one more time. Try block looks out for any errors that might that might raise from the code within it, whereas except block executes when there is an error in try block. Else block executes if there is no error in the try block, but finally block executes no matter there is an error or no error. Okay, so no matter if try blocks has an exception or not, doesn't have an exception, the finally block is definitely going to get executed, right? So let's just see it in action. So we have f equals to open of hello.txt in read mode, and there is no error in it because the file name is right and everything looks fine. So this is going to get executed, and since there are no errors, we are going to jump into the else block, and we're going to print out the file contents, and we're going to close the file, and finally blocks definitely gets executed even though there is an error or no error. The finally blocks will definitely get executed. So as this says, runs no matter what, exception or no exception. So finally we're going to get this line printed. Print, I need to print this line. There we go. So that is how this works. Now let me just demonstrate with an error as well. So I'm just modifying the file name to some wrong file, and I'm running this. So this should show throw an error. There we go. This threw an error into file not found error exception, and this got printed. The error message got printed, and the finally message got executed. So that is how finally blocks work. Now we're going to see an example of raising our own exceptions. Let's say you want to uh, throw an exception by your own instead of Python throwing an exception. So for that you can simply use this raise exception. Okay, so you can simply write raise space exception, and this is going to throw an exception. So now let's just see. So what I'm doing is I'm just opening the file and I'm checking the first character. So if the first character in the file is h, then I'm going to throw an exception, and or you can call it raising an exception, and this is going to be caught by this particular line, and the error message is going to be printed out. So now let's just see. There we go. So since the file contained this particular message, hello user, and the first letter is hello, this if statement equated to true, and this particular line got executed where we raised an exception, and this particular except block caught that exception and printed out the error message. So that is all about exception handling. So we saw how we can use try and except blocks to continue the flow of execution no matter if an error exception raises or doesn't raise. And we saw how you can use else blocks to close any important files or databases that you might have opened. And we saw how we can use finally block to execute some particular code no matter there is an exception or there is no exception. And finally we saw how to raise your own exceptions. So that is all about exception handling, and I'll see you in the next video.